Hello,
Hello.
everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
How is everybody?
We're doing good.
Doing good?
Doing good.
So,
Good deal. Good deal. Welcome, everybody, to episode. I don't even remember, Lily, what
Number
episode is
8.
this?
Number 8. Number 8.
Did you say number 8? Okay. Welcome to episode 8 of Awareness is Key. I am Valerie and Heather and Lily. Um, So
Hello.
we're excited to be here, and I hope everybody's excited to be here as well. We've covered the past few weeks the different forms of domestic violence. So tonight we're going to talk about some of the barriers to leaving these situations. And there's a lot of them. There is a lot of reasons people do not leave early in a relationship, or even, when it gets really, really bad, there's reasons people don't leave. And we want to kind of address those. So we do believe, as always, I will always go ahead and say this, that through education and awareness will hopefully come prevention, and that is our goal, is to bring awareness and education to the topic of domestic violence. Also, I am going to add that there is a trigger warning as always. So just be aware of that. All right, y'all. So I guess we're just going to jump right into it. Does anybody have anything before we jump into it they want to say?
well, I would like to mention, and you mentioned it, that when things get really bad, sometimes it's when people say, well, why doesn't he or she leave at this point? And it's when it's the most dangerous time, when things get worse. And if you think things got worse, uh, if the perpetrator finds out that the victim is about to leave, then it becomes really, really dangerous. And that's where we see a lot of
Yeah.
victimization in terms of individuals killing their partners because they don't want them to leave. So that's something that is important to
Yeah.
be aware of.
Yeah, and I think that was one thing that I was actually going to cover here, is that, it looks like there's about a 75% increase in homicide through domestic violence at the point of separation, and even 75% more up to 2 years after that. So, that is a big fear for somebody, I'm sure. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and start us out, and I'm going to kind of read just a little bit here. And it says, many people ask, why doesn't the victim leave? Why does the victim stay? And it's not that simple. It's important to understand that there's many barriers to safety in an abusive relationship. Leaving is often dangerous, and there are many factors a survivor must consider in the analysis of how to respond to an abusive partner. The better question is, why does the abuser do this, and how can I help the survivor gain access to safety? And that is, if I am an outsider looking into this situation, instead of throwing the questions, why do they not leave? I need to be addressing it from my point of view, saying, why does the abuser do this, and how can I help that victim be safe? So, the reality is, it's the most dangerous time for a survivor is when they leave that abusive partner. And we just talked about the 75% increase in homicides during the point of separation and 2 years beyond. So, um, anyway, the concerns are very real and must be addressed with safety planning. And before we move on too far, we're going to talk a little bit about safety planning. But next week, that will be our topic: is what is a safety plan and why is it important? And, things that can be addressed in that. So I thought I would go ahead and throw that in there. And now we're just going to talk about some of those barriers that are involved to leaving. So So I don't know which one of y'all wants to start out with that, but I'm going to throw it to y'all and let you all take it.
Well, I can jump in there. Isolation is a big one. A lot of times you've been isolated from friends, family, community support, resources. At times your phone's being monitored. Um, your network's been cut off. Sometimes your emails, your texts, everything you do is being monitored. So to be able to get to the resources you need, you may just be isolated to the point where you don't have that contact at the moment.
Yeah, and
Children,
that's important to understand because
Right.
when people are isolated and they have made a decision that they're going to do something about it, they cannot do it on their own.
No.
No way they can do it on their own. They need some kind of help. So it makes it difficult even for somebody on the outside who wants to help. It makes it really difficult to work things out. So that's the isolation really works very well for the perpetrators.
Well, let's remember they spend that whole relationship pretty much working on that goal of isolation, right? They want you to cut off your family. They want you to cut off your friends because the more people that see you, the more people that interact with you, the more people that are going to potentially pick up on the fact that you're in this relationship, and they don't want that. They want you to depend solely on them and nobody else.
Hmm.
Exactly.
And
True.
so that's one of the main things. So of course that's going to be one of your biggest barriers because you have shut off family and friends.
Hmm.
And it's sad.
Um, if we want to go
So
on to another one, children, and this is a huge one, um, it could be fear of the abuser maybe has threatened to do something to the children, or custody concerns. And so, unfortunately, the abuser gaining custody, even when you have restraining orders against them, or they may even have some charges against them, still in about 50% of the cases, they still end up with custody and with visitation. So, the fear of leaving your children to deal with that on their own and not being able to be there, protect them is real. Um, Also, a lot of times when the abuser loses control of their partner, then the next thing they can use, the only thing left they have to use is the children. And so either hurting them or just using them, threatening to take them from you, all of those things is a real concern when you have kids involved in that situation.
Yeah, and one thing that happens in these,
let me ask.
yeah,
Oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I was actually going to ask Lily or you. I thought I'd throw this one to Lily. Is when it comes to children, though, how are the shelters set up? Are shelters set up to where that they're set up if you have boy children, girl children, to where all ages of dependent children can go into domestic violence shelters?
unfortunately, if we don't have a shelter, but because we do help the victims of domestic violence, this is a barrier that they're having. If
Hmm.
they have boys, the shelters don't have the means to set up a room for a boy because
Okay.
it could interfere with other children that are there that are girls. So that is a barrier, and it
Hmm.
Yeah.
is it's a big problem because then they cannot go to the shelter because they have boys.
Right. So for somebody that might be in that situation though, I know that there's shelters, sometimes places like the Salvation Army, which is not domestic violence shelters, but sometimes they have family units that can take boys, or say it's um, but that's why organizations and agencies like yours would be important, would be for those people that are not eligible for shelters, but that way they would have access to the assistance early.
For housing.
Right.
Hmm.
Daniel,
Okay.
did you want to add to that?
Yeah, in the case that the victim is going to go to a non
Domestic.
domestic.
domestic violence shelter and they're going to another kind of shelter, the most important thing is secrecy about it. Don't
Mhm.
tell where you're going. Don't give an idea where you're going. And if you have children, make sure that if they have telephones, that they don't have contact with the abuser at that point. Um, Maybe the kids will not understand for some reason, but you have to let them know that it is important for everybody to stay
Yes.
safety. And another issue I would like to stress is that it, it happens mostly with males, perpetrators, that they want to have control of everything. If they have control of everything and they go to court, they're going to try to convince the court that they are in a safer place than with the mother, which is what
Mhm.
we see very often, because the mother has no place to go. She may have no income. She, excuse me. She may have no support. Then that perpetrator is going to take all that information and going to use it in his favor. And sometimes the courts have no other choice, or they don't have enough information to stop that. But if you are going to leave the home and you have children, uh, make sure that you have a good plan to leave the home. And that's going to be important. And next week, we're going to be talking about safety plans uh, because if you're a young mother and have one child, two children, three children, and you want to leave with them, um, that's going to be something that you're going to have to work out very seriously. And if you don't, you might regret it. If you leave by yourself and leave the children with the perpetrator, that could be mistaken by the court or some other people as you abandon the family.
Mhm.
Right.
So,
Right.
Yeah.
uh, and if you have not ever made a report against the perpetrator and there's no evidence or any history in the court system or in law enforcement, uh, they will they will have a difficult time believing you. They're going to consider it as abandonment of the family.
Yeah. Let me also point out that, you were talking about secrecy if going to other shelters. And I think that's also important to understand for people that may not be familiar with domestic violence shelters. Domestic violence shelters are set up as safe houses or safe places.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
if you've ever been a victim that has used a domestic violence shelter, it is extremely, extremely important that you don't share that information with anybody ever, because that is putting potential or the future
Right.
people that would go to those shelters in jeopardy. They don't want people to know where these houses are at. These are safe houses. If you're fleeing a domestic violence situation, you don't tell anyone where you're going. Safe houses and domestic violence shelters are set up in a very specific way to where you make contact with them and they get you there and they make sure that they're
Mhm.
keeping you and the other residents safe.
Yes.
So I just think it's really
Yes.
important to stress that. Most communities do have domestic violence shelters. You're not going to know it's a domestic violence shelter. It's not going to be labeled as a domestic violence shelter because it's a safe house. It's a safe place.
Right.
Yeah, you
So,
won't see a sign up front that says domestic violence shelter.
no,
No.
The
no,
purpose is to keep everybody safe.
right. And that is for past, present, future people.
Yeah.
And so it's just really important. Maybe you live in a community and you know what that is. Don't broadcast that to people. Don't say what that is because you never know who you could be putting in potential jeopardy. So that's
Yeah,
just my little PSA there.
we've seen shelters that have to be closed and moved to another place because uh, somebody said what it was, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
one of the people inside the shelter called a boyfriend or a husband and they got there, and for that reason they had to shut down that shelter and put it somewhere else. So
Yeah.
that is a very expensive, it's very costly, plus it puts everybody at risk. So keep these things in mind.
Right, and
Mhm.
not to mention if that person is one that leaves and then goes back to that relationship and has to leave again in the future, well, if you've already told that person where you're at and what that is, you just lost your safe place that you would have to go. So,
Well, and that's a good, I think, also reminder too is location services on your phone
yep,
and your apps that have maps. You're probably better off just turning off your phone at that point,
yep.
because there are apps that can be put on your phone that are tracking that you may not even know are on your phone.
Right, well,
Right.
things like Snapchat, it
Mhm.
tracks location. I mean, you can
Yeah.
turn your I mean, if you just go in and say, "Okay, I'm gonna disable my location through this one," and you're not thinking, like you
Mhm.
said, about all these other things. So you're absolutely right. It's probably time to turn that off and, get a new phone eventually, I mean,
Mhm.
seriously, because you don't know what services, because it just takes a half a second for somebody to see your location.
Well, and that'll kind of go along next week with our safety planning
Yeah,
also.
yeah.
Um, and we can probably move on to fears. Fear is another big reason why people don't leave. And there's a lot of reason to be afraid, obviously, but fear of retaliation. Because you remember, we're talking about power and control. And when someone loses control and loses power over you, I mean, that is what they have done. When they lose control, that sets them to a whole different level. So, fear of retaliation is huge. If they find you or if you go back, it's hard to tell. Um, Fear for your life, fear for your family's life. They may have threatened you, say, if you leave me, I'm going after your family, I'm going after your mom, dad, brother, whoever. Fear of being blamed for the abuse. Remember, if you've been abused, it's not just physical. And I think we get into thinking this is all physical, but mental abuse, emotional abuse is huge. And at this point, a lot of people may still believe that this is partly their fault or they've caused it in some way.
Exactly.
Um, Fear of where they're going to go, what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, fear of being stalked, um, unsupervised visits, visitation. Because even if you have an order of protection, unless the judge just deems that there's something crazy, the other person is going to have visitation. And and even if you have an order of protection, that has to be worked out. So that is an honest fear. Um, Fear of not having support. Where am I going to live? You know, um, and for the LGBTQ plus community, even fear of being outed if you haven't come out at that point. Um, but the restraining order is also fearful to some because how many restraining orders are broken? You know.
It's a piece of paper. I mean, and
Hmm.
honestly, it might be the only option you have, but absolutely, how many of them are broken? And that has to be scary, you know?
And unfortunately, what happens is the the perpetrators are finding out these things, these loopholes.
Yeah.
So we've seen many cases where the victim calls the cops because they got an order of protection. Cops get there and he hasn't been inside the property or he hasn't tried to get inside the property and they say there's nothing we can do. And
Hmm.
then
Right.
the victim is now she's more fearful because there's nothing anybody can do unless he tries to come in and hurt her, and then that could be a reason for charges. But it is a very tricky thing. So
Hmm.
when you get an order of restriction, or I should say, if you have supervised visitation, you can ask the court, okay, that be supervised by a third party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't let it be just like that. You and the perpetrator and the child. that could be considered supervised, but you want a third party. So if
Yes.
the court does not mention that, it's okay to tell the court, I fear for my life. I fear that I could be hurt, or something can happen. Please have a third party there. And usually the courts do agree with that.
Yeah. I think fear is one of those because, it's like an inner turmoil or inner struggle within a victim because they have to be afraid to stay, but they're
Hmm.
also facing all of these fears to leaving.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I think that honestly is probably one of where you actually have to sit down and weigh the pros and the cons because,
Hmm. Well,
And
and I think that, go ahead.
we all know what fear is. So fear can help us in a positive way, or it could help us in a negative way. But unfortunately, it's most of the time it helps us in a negative way because we get lost in that moment. We don't know what to think. We don't know what to do, and that puts us in a very dangerous position.
right. Well, fear can be paralyzing. It honestly, it
Right.
can just, and you don't want to be in that paralyzed state when you're in a relationship like this, but unfortunately it does happen. Do I leave or do I stay? Well, we know I just gave you kind of the statistic, about the 75% increase during the time that, during that separation phase. It's not it's there's not going to be a good outcome to staying in most cases. There's just not.
Well, and
And
I
that's
think that that's
sad.
why we are doing what we are doing and trying to bring education through awareness and prevention because we don't want people to get to this point. We want
Right.
people to learn and learn the signs and learn about domestic violence so that hopefully it won't get this far.
Yeah.
And I hope and I wish that our viewers notice that we are not sugarcoating these issues. We are stressing them as realistically as possible, because these are serious matters, and sugarcoating it does not help in any way. We try to make you understand. We are not making you fearful of what you need to do. We are trying to help you be informed on what you need to
Hmm.
do if you're a victim, and if you are a friend of a victim, that you know also how to help these people.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay.
So
So what's
let's
the
look at
next
some
one?
other barriers. Of course, we've talked about the physical harm, of course,
Right.
the fear of being hurt after calling the police. I mean, and you can kind of talk barriers to leaving an abusive relationship, but some of these are also barriers to reporting and
Yeah,
calling the police. I think, would you all agree that they kind of go hand in hand,
Right.
same kind of things?
I do.
Um, so physical harm, even after having medical attention, you know, but threats is another big one. Um, and it may not even be threats for physical harm. They may have threatened to commit suicide. If you
Right.
leave me, I will kill myself.
The guilt trip.
Yes, major guilt trip, major. And it's such an emotional abuse thing. But
I think
you
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I
No,
think
go ahead.
that's like the ultimate form of gaslighting right there myself too, though, is to say, if you leave, I'm gonna kill myself. That means,
Mhm.
that if something were to happen to them, you caused it, not them, not the decision they made, not
Right.
whatever, I mean,
Mhm.
and it's wrong. It is wrong. But that is a common tactic that is used.
Oh yeah, that and
It's
threatening
a
to
cop
take the
out.
child.
It's a
Exactly,
cop out.
it is.
Yep. Yep.
Threatening to take the children. That's a huge one for women that have children. It's usually one of the if you talk to a lawyer, if you talk to people, they're going to say they all say that, that they're going to take the children. They're going to get custody of the children. They may threaten to kill your pet or to hurt your pet, an animal. They may threaten to call immigration services. You know, if you're in a
Yeah.
situation, um, they may threaten to out you. You know, if you haven't been there.
Well, and expose all of your secrets. I mean, this is a person you've been in a relationship with, and you share intimate details. And that's again another reason we mentioned before. You don't let people take pictures and videos and things like that because it's at this point, that when you're talking about outing someone, that they would threaten, I'm going to share these videos or these pictures of you,
Hmm.
and a lot of people, well, most people would not want that out there. So, I mean,
Right.
it's just form of control and intimidation.
Excuse me. Yeah. Um, Money, the economic part of it, is a huge one also because if they have complete control over the finances, if you don't have access to the money, um, or they're the sole, if you're not working, and you don't have any money, then what are you? Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? They may have destroyed your credit,
Yeah.
and so taking out a loan or doing those things may also be a problem too.
And I wanted to mention, when we're speaking of these things, we can't deny or
Confirm.
minimize that males can be victims too, because
No.
Absolutely.
I've gotten calls where the wife is the breadwinner. They're staying home with the children, and that person is using drugs, abusing the husband,
Mm-hmm.
which is it's really bad. So it comes from maybe a man doing it to a woman, but there's women that do it to a man too. Um, and now they're homeless, and DCS gets involved because now there's an issue because there's no finances, so there's no place to have those children. If if the wife is the abuser and in on drugs,
Mm-hmm.
then it makes him look in a bad situation. So we have to look at those things too.
Well,
Um,
the system will consider leaving if the perpetrator is a female, the system would consider placing the children with the father. But if he doesn't have a job, if he doesn't have
exactly,
a place where to go, they have no choice but to remove the children. Not
Mm-hmm.
because the father did anything wrong or the victim is doing anything wrong. It's because they have no means to take care of the children. So
because the wife
that's
was the
fair.
breadwinner. Hmm.
No, that's a
That
great.
is something.
Right.
That is something
Well,
that the
this is
perpetrators
probably a
want.
really good time to
Yeah, go ahead.
go ahead. I had a lag. I had a lag.
Yeah, and that is
I said this.
yeah,
Go
that
ahead,
is
Daniel.
something that the perpetrators know, and they use it many times against the victims.
Hmm.
Well, I think this is probably a really good time to point out there are going to be people with the monetary, the financial reasonings that they can't leave. And that is why, and again, I'm going to say agencies like a Safe Harbor Home are so
Mm-hmm.
important. Yes, okay, cutting out, sorry. Agencies like a Safe Harbor Home are so important. And just because you may not be within the 8 counties that a Safe Harbor Home covers, there are agencies in many communities that are similar, that operate with the grant funding, that have the funds to be able to assist victims who are fleeing domestic violence situations. So it's really important to become aware of the resources in your community. And Lily and Daniel with a Safe Harbor Home are there to answer any questions, regardless of whether you're in the counties that they cover or not. They can try to direct and guide you.
And even if
And
you're
then,
not from this area and you are watching us and you don't know what to do, give us a call. We'll do the best we can to find
Mm-hmm.
out resources for you and to figure out how we can be of help. You don't have to come to us. You don't have to move to Tennessee if you're out of Tennessee or out of the Northeast area. just give us a call, and we will
Exactly.
find out a way to work it
Yeah.
out.
And to
Mhm.
find out what services they offer, of course, you can check their website. That is a safeharborhome.org, and you can email them, and the number and the email address are at the bottom of your screen. And I'll give you those again later or towards the end of the show. But anyway, there are resources, and they will help you find them. So, all
Mhm.
right. So, what we got next?
Well, we can talk about homelessness, which ties up with the previous one that we were
Mhm.
talking about. Uh, when there's no income, and then the victim, and let's make clear that the issue in some relationships, they don't have children, but if the victim doesn't have any income, the
Mhm.
victim has been isolated from everybody else, they can become homeless very easy. And that's a big fear, because if you've never been homeless, uh, just to think about where am I going to stay tonight? How am I going to stay? I've never been homeless. That's a very, very dangerous situation. Uh, where do I go? Where do I sleep? How do I sleep? How do I eat? Those are very important questions that make the victim sometimes stay because they have no other choice.
Well, and I think that brings up a
Yeah.
good point too,
Um,
because some people may say, "Well, why don't you just go stay with a friend, or why don't you just go stay with family?" But oftentimes, would you agree that people don't want to put other people in danger, or they just may not have someone else that they can stay with?
right. Or they're facing shame.
Yeah, that too.
Maybe the other people don't really know and they're not ready to say, hey, this is what I've been through. I mean, mad props. Rachel's giving y'all, Lily and Daniel, y'all are awesome people, she says.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
and she also says she's been there before and it's awful. So, and yeah, it is, but there's, all right. So,
Yeah,
Lily's back.
and sometimes what happens is that you may try to go and stay with somebody, but that somebody knows the issues, and they, not because they don't like you, they don't want to put themselves at risk, and you can't blame them.
No.
So,
No,
these are
sure
things that
can't.
are very important and very significant for the people who are on the outside to keep in mind, because you can't judge somebody who's being victimized just arbitrarily. You have to make sense on what you're going to do, and the best thing to do, don't judge them. Find out which way you can help. If you can't help directly, maybe finding some resources for them, that should be enough.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Another one is a lack of resources or information. There are communities that the resources are limited. We have to be aware of that. When you have big cities, you have all kinds of services everywhere, here and there and everywhere. But in smaller communities and in rural communities, the resources are very limited.
Hmm.
So somebody who lives in a small area that doesn't have much resources, they are very fearful on what they are going to do and how they're going to do it, especially if they don't have the right information.
Hmm.
The next one would
Well,
be, yeah.
okay. One thing I want to hang on, Dane. Hang on just one second. One thing I want to bring up is, coming from the case management side of it, if you're lacking resources, say in domestic violence, resources in that area, I'm a big supporter, big proponent of the mental health services. Usually, not every community has it, but there is some form of mental health, at least in general areas. Maybe not each and every small community, but in maybe a larger area close. And a mental health case manager will be able to work with you and
Yes.
link you to these resources. Not to mention, you can get in. I mean, I really do believe that people who have been in a domestic violence situation will benefit from therapy. And I say that just about every single time that they're in there.
Mhm.
But also,
Yeah.
don't forget the case management aspect of it, because
Right.
the therapist can help you work through the feelings. The case manager can link you to those resources when that is needed. So,
Yeah, and it's important. It's important that you take care of yourself, because you may think that, oh, this is nothing. I can take it. I can survive it. But PTSD is a
Mhm.
silent individual on the side that not operate. It doesn't operate always in the moment. It can
Right.
operate months later, weeks later, years later,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know where your problems are coming from. So it's important that you keep these things in mind.
right. Okay.
The next one would be shelters. Sometimes the problem is that the shelters don't have space. Don't let that intimidate you. If one shelter doesn't have space, you can call the hotline and they will try to do as much as they can to get you in a safe place. Uh, First of all, if you're in imminent danger and uh, you're hiding in a room or in a closet or something like that, call 911 immediately and make sure that you can get in contact with some kind of shelter. And again, if the shelters are full, there's ways that can be worked out so you are safe. That's what important, most important, especially if you have children. You want to be safe and you want your children to be safe.
And
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say there's agencies too that if it is a victim of domestic violence and the shelters are full, there's agencies, if they contact us, that we can put them in contact with. If they have proof of domestic violence, police reports, or showing that they are fleeing, they can pay for a hotel and put them safe until they can move them to a shelter or find a shelter available.
You
Right.
know, one thing that we need to be grateful in America is that domestic violence has been on the front page, and as a result of that, there are many services out there, and there are many people who are willing to walk the second mile and do whatever it is to keep the victims safe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
Well, and I think that we have cases like, most recently with Gabby Petito, that has brought, it's shed additional light on, just how bad domestic violence can get.
Hmm.
And, it's unfortunate, but, it brings it back to light. I think a lot of times people just, it's almost like out of sight, out of mind. And until you face it, you just don't realize how serious it is. So I'm thankful that we're able to do these lives to be able to, in our small way, be able to bring light to it.
Yes.
um, Heather, you mind going through the next ones?
Yeah, sure. Um, Another one would be racism, transphobia, homophobia, and discrimination against individuals in the LGBTQ plus relationships, just with the criminal justice system, even. And so then that brings a fear of turning to the police or the court system. Um, and that kind of goes into also just the failure of the criminal justice system as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, the criminal system is not perfect,
Mm-mm.
and sometimes we get very frustrated with it because things don't go the way they should. But don't let that hold you back.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in a situation and you call the cops because this is the first time and you call the cops and nothing happens, uh, just make sure that they have a report of it.
Hmm.
That's a big mistake that I've seen a lot of people do. They they call the cops. When the cops come in, then they refuse to say anything or do anything. That's a big mistake. Just let the cops do their job. Ask them to write a report. If it's documented, there you start having you start having a history.
Hmm.
Hopefully, uh, you can get out of that situation early enough that you don't have to call them again. But if you decide to stay in that situation and it happens again, you call the cops again. Uh,
Yeah.
Again, nobody's going to judge you. They shouldn't be judging you for doing that. It's a choice that you have to make, but it's something that if you're a victim, you need to consider this very seriously, because if you do not have reports of domestic violence, when you try to go to the legal system, they're gonna say, "Is there any reports?" If there's none, it's gonna make it very difficult for them to do anything because there is no evidence.
Right. It's your word against theirs at that point. It's a he said, she said thing.
Well, and let's not, I know that the first thing that we opened up with was racism. And, unfortunately, people do not think it still exists. It very much does.
Hmm.
And so, you would be surprised in some communities across the world just how much that would come into play. So, yeah,
Well, and even with
anyway,
that, there are some states, and I don't have a list in front of me, but there are some states that will not grant orders of protection or do not recognize same sex couples as a couple, I guess. They won't award order of protections to them because they don't recognize that. And some states will not award, excuse me, order of protections in dating situations, even. There
right.
are a few, I think there's 12 states, I could be wrong on that one, but that won't allow order of protection in a dating situation.
Right. Well, let's also remember that for, people who are transgender,
Hmm.
there's shelters that if someone identifies opposite of what their biological,
Yeah.
birth was, the shelters may or may not take them. So
Hmm.
there is a whole lot of barriers that's surrounding people of different races, ethnicities, sexual orientations,
Yes,
gender identification. So,
absolutely.
And that's a very tricky one because if
mhm,
you're in that position and you're looking for help and they don't give you that help, what do you do? What do you
Exactly.
do? Just
right,
keep looking, just keep searching, just keep calling and keep asking, because that's important. Your safety is more important than anything else. It's
Hmm.
unfortunate that the system it works like that, but it is a fact. So
Yep.
as long as it is a fact, it's very important for you to know as a victim, if you're a victim, for you to know what to do, and don't hold back because you think they're going to discriminate against you. If they discriminate against you for any reason, then you have resources to talk about discrimination. So um, safety is the most important thing. So keep yourself safe. Don't let yourself be abused. You don't need to be abused. It's
right,
not your fault. So
right.
please listen to what we say very carefully, because what we're looking is for your safety.
Yes. I think we got a couple of more, don't we?
Yeah, we do. Family pressure, culture, religion, some of those things can be a barrier in leaving, um, or just staying together. But culture just can't excuse the abuse. It can, abusers may use culture or may use religion or may use all of those things to try to justify their abuse, but it's always a choice, and that's the
Yeah.
bottom line: is abuse is a choice.
Yeah, when we talk about
Well, and
culture,
I,
The thing that sometimes gets complicated is that people who come from other cultures, where, for instance, the male has all the rights and the females have no
Hmm.
rights. When you come to America, it's a different story.
Yeah.
So you don't have to live under that. But again, safety is the issue. If
Yep.
that is your case, if you are from another culture and the male figure has all the rights, and in that country you didn't have any rights, in America you do have rights, and you can call for help and you can get the help that you need.
That's a great point.
Yeah, well, I also think that when we're talking about that, as far as, the religion, culture, whatever, saying, a lot of people, a lot of victims in their mind, say, "Well, I shouldn't leave. I took these vows," So I think that
Hmm.
comes into the victim as well and
Yeah.
plays into their mentality, not just the perpetrator, but
Right.
it's how serious did I take my vows? And my mom and dad always told me, when you get married, you stay married and you stay and work it out, or whatever,
Right.
and so I think that really it can get in your head. It really
Yeah.
can.
And that's why
So
Heather said it's a choice.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's a choice that every victim has to make. It's
Yep,
their choice to make.
yep,
Right.
yep.
And it's
Just
the
because
perpetrator's choice to act that way also. The perpetrator, not just
absolutely
because it's a cultural norm for wherever it is, but it is
Hmm.
right.
their choice.
Right. I mean, tradition, family tradition, I think comes into that a lot too.
Hmm.
How if somebody is of a different culture and that's the way it has completely been, then that of course carries on. But at some point, the cycle has to break.
To
I
end.
mean, it has to
Hmm.
break. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody needs to be a victim.
no,
Nobody needs to be a victim. But if you are a victim, there's things that you can do. There are things you can make. And talking about these things, when we talk about values that people have, like we don't believe in divorce, or the church doesn't accept what I'm saying. Um, it's important that if you are being abused, it doesn't matter if you go to church, it doesn't matter if the church doesn't believe you. If you are going through it, you need to do something about it.
that's right.
You need to do something about it. Don't let religion stand in the way of what your rights are. And as a human being,
Yeah.
nobody has the right to abuse anybody else. So why should anybody use religion to abuse somebody else, and then have that religion back that perpetrator, and say there's nothing wrong with it, you just have to obey, you just have to follow
Right.
what we believe. uh, that's not true. And I'm a minister. I respect very much marriage. I have To me it's a serious thing, but when marriage becomes abusive, something needs to happen. Sometimes, if it's addressed early on time, it can be fixed. But if
Right.
it's been for too long, it makes it a little bit more difficult. But that means that both of you need the help to get out of that situation. And don't let religion stop you from just doing what is right for you and keeping you safe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, we got two more.
One of those is hope or belief that the partner will change. And a lot of times that comes along with being
That one's
told.
pretty self-explanatory, isn't it?
Yeah. A
Yeah.
lot of times
Yeah,
it comes along with being told the whole time, if you would just, I would. So believing that they're going to change or hoping. I mean, of course, you want to hold on to hope that this is not the way it's going to be. And if you have a pattern or the cycle happening where you have a honeymoon phase, which doesn't always happen, then you're hoping, okay, it's going to be okay. This time it's going to be different. So, and then it also goes along with the fear, of them being arrested and consequences for what might ruin their life, but really that hope and belief that they'll change and be somebody better.
And when
Right.
it comes to
How many
perpetrating,
times do you know this? I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
I'm lagging. I'm sorry, y'all. I don't mean to cut y'all off. But no, what I was going to say is also when you think about the hope that someone's going to change, how much is the apologies afterwards?
Hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry, and it'll never happen again. So it's those broken promises, that it will
Yeah.
never happen again. you know so there is so much of that, and I think that kind of ties in, as well, because you were talking about um the victim thinking that if they do something different it will change.
Hmm.
And that brings in the very last one, which is shame. Because is the victim sitting there thinking, I'm the one that caused this? This is what I have done. And they wouldn't do this if I was a better housekeeper. Or they wouldn't do this if I cooked better or whatever. And then that brings the shame of that failed relationship. In their mind, it's a failed relationship because they've not done their part, and it's not. It is not, but, you know
Well, and I think that also goes along with how much victim blaming we do, which goes back to the original question, which was, why don't you just leave? Why do you stay with them? That's where, to me, the victim blaming
yeah,
starts, is when you put it on them, like, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? The court
yeah,
system often re-victimizes, and some of it's unintentional, but it is. I know you can add, Daniel, to that.
Well, what we need to understand when it comes to the court system, we are not referring solely to the judges making
Right.
decisions. We are talking about when the case goes before the court, the perpetrator's attorney is not going to put the perpetrator in a bad light.
No.
He's going to try to put you in a bad light. So that sometimes that
Yeah.
fear of being shamed in the court
Yeah.
system, sometimes holds people back. But it's unfortunately it's part of the system. And if you need to do what you need to do, you just go ahead and do it. If you've taken a lot of abuse from an individual and it's time to make it stop, sometimes there's a high price to pay. And it's I hate to say it like this, but sometimes you have to choose which is worse: put your life at risk, or
Yeah.
you just go ahead and take it in court and just prove your point, because the truth is going to come out.
You're right.
yeah. All right, y'all. I think we're kind of at that time to where we throw in a couple of little final closing thoughts there. So I'm going to start with Heather. Heather, you got any closing thoughts tonight on these barriers to leaving?
Um, just that there's so many barriers that may make you think that this is impossible and I'm stuck and I can't get out of this situation. But just know that there is help. There are people who would want to advocate for you and help fight with you. And don't give up. Don't give
Yeah,
up.
keep fighting for sure. Daniel.
And following your statement, the reason why we are here is because we care.
Yeah.
So there is real people out there who really care about your safety and who really want to be able to help you. So remember, and I'll repeat this again, it's never your fault, and you
Mhm.
do not have to be abused.
Right. Well, I don't know where Lily went, but I will tell you what some of Lily's final thoughts would be, because she is always one that will tell you if you need help. reach out. The number she did put up down at the bottom of the screen, which is the 423-218-0774, or email at info@asafeharborhome.org. I guarantee you, if you call that number, you will speak to Lily personally because she is the one that
Mhm.
does answer that number. Lily has a lot of knowledge when it comes to working with victims of domestic violence. Her and Daniel both do. They have done it for years. They are very good at what they do, and their agency has helped a lot of people. And they
Mhm.
do have the ability to help even more. So we want to make sure anybody that is in need reaches out, whether you're in the 8 counties that they serve in Northeast Tennessee or not. They are a resource that you want to have handy, because if you're in this situation, they will listen to you and they will guide you on how best to
Mhm.
get you safely out of there and get you the help that you need. If you want to see the services they do offer, make sure to check out their website at a safeharborhome.org. There you can find out about the services. Also, if you would like to contribute either through time, they're always looking for volunteers, or financially for money to go back into the programs that they offer. You can find the information and the links on that website. For my closing thoughts tonight, I just want to simply say there's always barriers to leaving, but there's dangers to staying.
Mhm.
We can help. There's agencies that will help you to remove those barriers, those fears. There's mental health treatment. There's mental health providers that are there to help you work through the fear, the shame, the guilt that as a victim you will feel. There are people to help. There's resources to help you figure out where domestic violence shelters, safe houses are at. There's resources that will help you if you're worried about financially how you're going to make it. You just have to reach out to somebody. Um, and like I said, a safe harbor home is a great place to reach out to.
And I
So,
just wanted to thank Rachel for coming on, and I
yes,
know in the comments she's been sharing a whole lot, and I just appreciate her joining us and
yeah.
sharing and being willing to share, and so thankful that she is where she's at in her journey.
Yeah, and I celebrate Rachel every time because she has been on every single one of our lives. So I do
Mhm.
Yeah,
appreciate that.
thank you,
Next
Rachel.
week, again, we are going to be talking about safety planning, because that is something that is very crucial in exiting a domestic violence relationship. So to be able to
Mhm.
safely do that. I also think after next week's live, we're going to take a little bit of a break to kind of work on getting calendars filled up for the next batch of lives we do, unless something has changed. Is that correct, Lily, Daniel? Going to take probably
That's
Yes.
2 or 3 weeks just to recharge.
Right. Yes.
I am
Yeah.
lagging. Okay. And I hear somebody's clock going off. So, but anyway, so I guess that means it is officially almost 8 o'clock. So we will close this out for tonight. And we will see you all back next Thursday night at 7 o'clock.
Good
All
night.
right.
Y'all have a good night.